Senator, please come to order. Senator from Orangeburg, what purpose do you rise?
My understanding is we're working out an amendment that will resolve this. I move to carry the next two amendments over while we resolve that and move on down. We'll come back to them as soon as they're ready.
Is objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Clerk will publish the next. Clerk will publish the next amendment. Senator, come to order. Clerk will read.
The next amendment is by Senator Cash and Senator Leatherman. Amendment number 53 by Senators Cash and Leatherman. Amends a bill, page 555, proviso 118.18, line 10, inserts numbered items.
Senator from Anderson, Senator Cash, recognized on the amendment.
I'm sorry, what was the
amendment number is amendment number 53.
Can you
previously carried over.
tell me what it is, sir?
It inserts appropriate number items to Parks, Recreation, Tourism. Sub-item A, Dolly Cooper Park improvement.
Unanimous consent to pull that down.
Is objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Clerk will read the next amendment.
Next amendment is amendment number 57 by Senators Hutto and Harpootlian.
Senator from Orangeburg, what purpose do you rise?
Move to withdraw the amendment.
Is objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Clerk will read.
The next amendment is by Senators Hutto, Harpootlian, Kevin Johnson, Jackson, and Saab. It's amendment 57A. Amends a bill on page
Senator from Orangeburg,
382.
recognized on the amendment. Senator Hutto.
Trying to develop an incentive program, and so we've taken what a lot of you have talked about and reworked it basically to say from the money that DHEC has that they can develop an incentive program of up to $100 for the first 500,000 South Carolinians. We took the age limitations out, Senator from Lawrence talked about. So obviously we get to the point where we're not getting the vaccines distributed. This authorizes them to come up with a incentive program. It no more than $100, and it will cover first 500,000 people with no age limitation. I move adoption.
Question is, adoption of the amendment. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Vote more generally. Roll call has been requested. 5 members second the call. 5 members do. Clerk will ring the bell. Reading clerk will call a roll.
Mr. Adams? No. Mr. Alexander? Aye. Mr. Allen? Aye. Mr. Bennett? No. Mr. Campson? No. Mr. Cash? No. Mr. Clymer? No. Mr. Corbin? No. Mr. Cromer? No. Mr. Davis? No. Mr. Fanning? Not voting, Mr. Gambrell? No. Mr. Garrett? No. Mr. Goldfinch? No. Mr. Grooms? No. Mrs. Gustafson? No. Mr. Harpootlian? Aye. Mr. Hembry? No. Mr. Hutto? Aye. Mr. Jackson? Aye. Mr. Kevin Johnson? Aye. Mr. Michael Johnson? No. Mr. Kimbrell? Mr. Kimbrell has leave. Mr. Kempson? Mr. Kempson votes aye. Mr. Leatherman? Not voting, Mr. Loftus? No. Mr. Malloy? Mr. Malloy votes no. Mr. Martin? No. Mr. Massey? No. Ms. Matthews? Aye. Mr. McElveen? Aye. Ms. McLeod? Aye. Mr. Peeler?
No.
No. Mr. Rankin? Not voting, Mr. Rice? No. Mr. Sabb? Aye. Mr. Scott? Not voting, Mrs. Sin? No. Mr. Stetchler? Aye. Mrs. Shealy? Not voting, Mr. Stevens? Aye. Mr. Talley? No. Mr. Turner? Mr. Turner votes no. Mr. Verdon? Mr. Verdon votes aye. Mr. Williams? Mr. Williams votes aye. Mr. Young? Mr. Young votes no.
If all senators voted, Senator Scott votes aye. If all senators voted, Senator Shealy votes no. If all senators voted, last call. Polls will close. Clerk will tabulate. By a vote of 16 to 26, the amendment fails. Clerk will publish the next amendment.
Next amendment is by Senator Harpootlian, amendment number 69. It amends the bill, page
Senator from
555,
Richland,
adds a
Senator
new
Harpootlian.
proviso.
Recognized on the amendment, Senator Harpootlian.
Yes, sir.
Senator.
Tired of hearing about my district. I'm tired about talking about it. But in my district is an area called 5 Points, which is undergoing a dramatic change. We have a huge number of vacant establishments down there. If you're familiar with Columbia, the corner of Blossom and Saluda, where there was a Wells Fargo bank, that is closed. A number of establishments down there have closed, and we have, in working with the City of Columbia, we have a number of folks interested in developing some of that property, but Columbia has the highest property taxes in the state. And to reiterate what I said the other day, the primary reason for that, I believe, and many economists believe, is that we have also the largest amount of untaxable property, most of it being state property or university property. What this amendment would do is give folks that spend at least $25 million, or within a half a mile of a public university with an enrollment of 30,000 students in a business district that has at least a 10% vacancy, would be allowed and been unoccupied for at least a year at the time of the filing of the notice of intent for tax credit, would get the same tax credit that the abandoned buildings tax credit allows. You got to invest $25 million, be in this location, and have at least a 10% vacancy.
Senator from Florence, Senator Leatherman, what purpose do you
Beautiful question.
He does.
Yes, sir.
Senator, thank you for yielding. You're talking about down in 5 Points, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
Hasn't this area down there, and I read the papers, watch TV, hasn't that sort of sunk into a hellhole?
Hellhole, yes, sir, and just
Do you know who lives there?
it's a hellhole. It is.
Devil.
Let
It is a.
Let me ask you another question, if I may. What this does, I think, is to try to give a real incentive. People come in, take abandoned buildings, fix them up, do whatever they got to. Otherwise, if they stay there vacant, would that tend to draw the homeless?
I'm sorry, sir.
Would that tend to draw the homeless?
Yes, sir.
So that's not good for the area, is it?
I'm sorry, the chairman of Senate Judiciary was speaking. I couldn't hear you.
So that's not good for the area, right, if we draw the homeless down there?
We have some homeless down there. If you go to the Starbucks like I do at 5:30 or 6 in the morning, there's a gaggle of homeless people begging for money. I've offered to buy them coffee or food. They just want the money.
So it seems to me, or do you understand, I believe that if we get those old vacant buildings, they're renovated, brought up to standard, that won't be quite as many homeless down there. Nowhere to sleep.
Well, we're trying to get rid of places for them to sleep. And I might point out, in all seriousness, the crime in that area.
I'm serious.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The crime in that area is rocketing. There was a university girl just the night before last raped not 100 yards from that Starbucks in 5 Points. Someone broke into her apartment and raped her. We've had murders. We just have all kinds of crime. We need to get economic development down there, get the undesirables out, and make it a place like it was when I moved to Columbia, which was restaurants, retail, the kind of places that a family would go and walk down to on a Saturday.
So did you know, Senator, that I recall an incident down there maybe 6 months, a year ago. Some young lady thought she was getting into an Uber, whatever that is, I'm not sure.
Sorry, sir.
Getting into a car and wound up being taken way down low country.
There was a young lady who was thought she was getting in an Uber, and she was kidnapped, raped, and murdered. It is, again, and this is less than a quarter of a mile from where I live, where a number of lawyers, doctors, very prominent people in our community live, and it's got to stop, and this will help stop it.
So one final question. Would you allow me to join you in moving and adopting this?
Sir?
Would you allow me to join you?
Yes, sir, please. Thank you. And unless there are other
Question
questions.
is,
Okay.
Senator from Pickens, Senator Rice, what purpose do you rise?
Will the senator yield?
Sure.
Question.
Yes.
I'm trying to read the amendment and understand it. It's got a $25 million investment tied to it. In other words, tell me, are we targeting a particular building? I'm not familiar with the area that
Well, there are a couple of buildings down there that might qualify. It's minimum $25 million investment. There is interest in developing a hotel in 2 or 3 different locations. I mean, there's so many abandoned buildings down there, you basically have your pick that are vacant. Now, they're not abandoned, but they're vacant. They've been vacant for a year or two. It's not specifically targeted to a location, but there are probably 2 or 3 that would meet that $25 million investment.
So they could tear a building down
Yes.
and start over
Yes.
and build a hotel that costs $25 million.
Yes, sir.
And they get a credit for whatever they invest?
Well, a partial credit. I think it's up to 25% credit.
So if they did that, that's what, $6.5 million, is that right?
Well, I think that's in, and I'll stand corrected by
$6.25
Senate
million.
Finance, but I think it is, there's a cap on that, but it's up to a certain point. Yes, sir.
Do you know of, I'm asking if you know, is there a project coming that you know of that
There's
would
no
fit in
project
this?
committed. Wells Fargo building on the corner of Saluda and Blossom have some folks that are local folks that have put a bid on buying it. They've got an option to buy it. The city of Columbia is talking about building a parking garage, which the city would pay for if there's the development of a hotel, retail, and other commercial on that lot. It's a big piece of property. Also, up the Divine Street, there's the old probation parole building, which the city bought. There's some folks talking about leveling that and turning it into either a hotel and retail or high-end condominiums.
I'm sitting here thinking about not a $25 million project, but smaller projects. You may spend $2 or $3, $4 million down there on rehabbing an old building. Why wouldn't you want them to be able to get that same credit if they're coming in there?
Great question. And I got to tell you, this came about because I had a meeting with the city officials and developers earlier this week, actually on Monday, to talk about what things we could do without having huge legislative changes. And this is sort of something to deal with the immediate issue. I will have what you want to do, I don't think can be done with existing legislation, and if we don't put a minimum investment on this, it's going to cost, well, it's not being anticipated. But I agree with you. We need to address that. I just don't think we can address it this year in a budget proviso. I think we'd need, in the city of Columbia, we need this not just in 5 Points, but a number of other places where there are abandoned buildings where we need to think outside the box on getting tax incentives to get people to come in and do those sorts of things.
Did you know it does concern me that you got it in a proviso instead of freestanding legislation? Because obviously, I mean, you're trying to drive that development. What you're trying to do is drive it within the next year. So anyway.
Yes, sir. And again, this is something this is not my normal bailiwick. And before I introduced it, I talked to Senate Finance staff at length and with the chairman of Senate Finance to make sure that I wasn't really off base, and they both, all of them, including Senator Leatherman, indicated that it
Senator
was
Florence, what
valid.
purpose do you rise?
Do you for a question?
Yes, sir.
So did you know, and you may not know, but did you know my hometown of Florence, it's over in the old poor PD section of the street.
I've been to Florence, yes, sir.
It is poor, isn't it?
Very poor at one point, not so much anymore.
Well, you know why not?
Yes, sir, I do.
Let me tell let me tell you why. Let me tell you why not. Because they're doing exactly the same thing there that you proposed here.
Well,
Took these old rundown dilapidated buildings and fixed them up. People moving in. And if you've been on Main Street in the poor old city of Florence, you go down that Main Street, you see some really attractive places.
yes, sir, and I must tell you, I dated a young lady from Florence when I was in college 50-something years ago, and had not been back probably in the last 40 years, but was there for just about a year ago, a year and a half ago, and was amazed at what's happened to downtown Florence. So y'all have done a great job.
So isn't this an effort, I'll ask you this question, isn't this an effort to not try to copy Florence, I wouldn't do that, but to try to take that dilapidated rundown section down there?
Yes, sir, that's exactly what y'all have done in Florence is what we want to do in Columbia, specifically in 5 Points.
Senator from Lexington, Senator Sessler, what purpose do you rise?
Yes, sir.
Senator, is there any restriction on what the people who buy the property can do with it? Is there any prohibition?
Well, that'll be covered by, there's prohibitions built into the City of Columbia zoning law. So it's going to restrict what can be built there, what it's zoned for.
But currently, when we pass this, then if a developer wanted to buy the property and build a dormitory for USC students there, they could do it and get this tax credit.
Over my dead body. Nice. I got
Senator from Berkeley, Senator Adams, what purpose do you rise?
See if Senator yield for a question.
He will.
Sure will, although Senator Martin is becoming extremely impatient over here, and so if we could move this along.
I got a simple question.
Yes.
So are you working with the city reference to like revitalization plans that they have as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And this is part of, this is their idea in the sense of how, a way to get to revitalization. Yes, thank you.
Question is, adoption of the amendment. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment's adopted. Clerk will read the next amendment.
Next amendment is by Senator Setzler. Amendment number 75
Senator
by
Lexington.
Senator Setzler amends the bill, Part 1B, page 555, Proviso 118.20. It strikes the $200 million appropriated to and inserts any funds appropriated or authorized for.
Senator from Lexington. Certainly. Please give Senator Sessler your attention.
The amendment dealing with this $200 million that is appropriated to the port, and we put provision in there about reporting and all. This just says any money that is appropriated. It takes out the $200 million limit because we don't know what the House may do based on what we've heard coming back. Any money that's appropriated, this reporting applies to. Move adoption.
Question is, adoption of the amendment. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment's adopted. Clerk will publish the next amendment.
Back to the top, Mr. President.
1A. Clerk will read.
Next amendment is by Senator Malloy. It's amendment
from
number
Darlington.
66, previously carried over. Senator Malloy, 1A, Section 78, Department of Insurance.
Senator from Darlington. Senator Malloy.
I got notes on that one. I'll give you a fresh copy. Here you go.
Senator from Darlington. Let me get some order. We'll stop for a while until y'all get quiet. I'm tired of begging you.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. This amendment that I had was for some money that we had appropriated, $1.6 or $1.8 million, I'm not certain how much it was, that they were going to end up placing in the Department of Insurance for a fraud unit. And so basically, the fraud unit that they were going to create was going to have oversight, if you will, by the Attorney General. They were going to set up the fraud unit there with the Department of Insurance lawyers, and they went ahead and placed money in there. But when my viewpoint is, I cut my teeth on the statewide grand jury when I was a kid, and it was my impression that the Attorney General prosecuted all cases. And so my question became then is that why do we give that authority over to an agency? And so when I inquired about it, they said, well, the General Assembly has never funded the Attorney General's office to be able to end up doing those prosecutions, and that we're having this fraud going on here in our states. We want to end up creating a unit down in the Department of Insurance. And I said, well, basically just rhetorically, then that's a problem, because if you got the Department of Insurance that is prosecuting fraud cases, then unfortunately, and maybe not intentionally, they may affect rates as it relates to other companies as to who is coming, who is not. And I think that then it goes back to what we started with the structure in the beginning, saying that this money should be allocated to the Attorney General. And so after some discussion, we've had a bill on the calendar for a period of time that would just transfer it to the Department of Insurance. I submit to you that that is not appropriate and should not happen in our state. And what they have since learned after conversation with the general and with the commissioner is that the Attorney General can do things by memorandum of understanding. And so the question becomes is that if you can do it by memorandum of understanding, then why do you need us? And so it then puts them in, it sets out the duties and responsibilities that you would have from the Attorney General's office, and so that then effectively he's in compliance and can still do what he is constitutionally required to do. And so the amendment that I had put up in the beginning took the money out, because why do we put the money out into the Department of Insurance when they don't have the authority to end up prosecuting cases unless they end up having a bill? Well, we don't have a bill, and there was no memorandum of understanding. And so after trying to put all the heads together, figure out what you do, is that what we decided to do is that, one, leave the money in, okay? Department of Insurance still don't have authority to do it, prosecute, but if the Attorney General decides he wants to put together a memorandum of understanding and give them that authority, they can end up doing so. And so consequently, what happens is that the money that we have in the budget this year ultimately will follow the fraud unit. Okay? And so with that, the only way, Senator from Newberry, you had tried to end up fixing it in another way. We've come back. I assume that you're withdrawing your amendment. And what will happen is that if I withdraw my amendment, then the money stays in the budget, and the only way that it occurs if they come up with a memorandum of understanding. And if they don't, then we'll have the money that maybe can end up flowing from the money that we have in the budget to the Attorney General. I yield for your question.
Newberry, I purposely rise.
Said he does. Senator, did you know I went back and talked with staff. I talked with the senator from Lexington and you and several others outside the Department of Insurance and the Attorney General's office, and everybody agreed that they could do it by memorandum of understanding, so I never filed that other proviso that I had. So if you were to pull yours down, then it would all just be handled. The money would be transferred.
And I was getting to that point, and so what happens, I just wanted to make certain that the body understood the fact of how the amendments were set forth, the discussions that were being had, so it could be totally complete. And so the 1.6 is 1.6 or 1.8 million?
1.6.
1.6 million, that it would remain, and therefore the good for the state of South Carolina, that it follows the issue, it will follow whoever they decide to end up setting it up. If the Attorney General decides he wants to end up doing it into that agency, he's got the ability to delegate it through the memorandum of understanding, so there would be no need to end up taking it out. So unanimous consent.
Senator, thank you.
There's objection to withdrawing the amendment. In none so ordered, Senator from Harrisburg will purposely rise.
Sure.
State your point, sir.
Rule that Proviso 38.29 violates Rule 24 in that it contravenes the code section 63-7-1710.
Anyone wish to speak to the point? Senator from Spartanburg. Senator Spartanburg, yield for a question. Senator Martinsburg.
Yes,
Senator, is this dealing with the foster care child placements?
it does.
Okay, I'll take a look at it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll take it under advisement. Clerk will publish the next amendment.
Next amendment by Senator Setchler. Amendment number 87 by Senator Setchler amends the bill, Part 1B, Department of Education. Proviso
Senator from
310.
Lexington. Objection to carrying over the amendment. Hearing none, so ordered. Amendment's carried over. Clerk will publish the next amendment.
Next amendments by Senators Clymer, Adams, Cash, and others. Amendment number 77 by Senator
Senator from
Clymer.
York, Senator Clymer. Recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment here gives some guidance and context to help educators regarding matters of race as they arise in the classroom. Conversations around race and racism are important. They're unavoidable in addressing a range of subject matter, and there's a healthy way and less healthy ways to have those conversations, particularly in a K-12 setting. So, in consultation with the senator from Fairfield, this amendment is carefully drafted to give guidance to educators, and importantly does so in a way without compromising educators' ability to continue receiving continuing education to further aid them in having these important conversations.
Question is adoption of the amendment. Senator from Clarendon, Senator Kevin Johnson.
I think I have the amendment. It doesn't have a number on it, Senator from York. But I do have a couple of questions.
Senator from York, yield for a question.
I would.
He does. Senator from Clarendon.
On your amendment, number 1, it says one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex.
Right.
So I think you're saying that they cannot teach that
That's
in
correct.
K through 12?
That's right.
And then I think number 3, it says an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or poorly because of his race
Right.
or sex. They cannot teach that?
Correct.
And I think the other question I had was number 7. I don't know what it means, meritocracy of traits such as a hard work ethic or racist or sexist or were created by members of a particular race to oppress members of another race. Can you explain those 3 items to me in a little more detail?
And so in some, let's see, your numbers were which?
1, 3, and 7.
Okay, so, well, 1 says that you cannot teach that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. So that would be a prohibition against teaching the opposite of that, right? And 3 was your other one?
Yes, sir.
And so this also would say that teachers shouldn't teach that an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of his or her race.
I'd like to ask unanimous consent to carry the amendment over so I can make sure I understand it further before we entertain it.
Thank you. I move to carry the amendment over.
Objection to carrying the amendment over. Hearing none, so ordered. Clerk will publish the next amendment.
Next amendment is by Senator Cash, amendment number 16A. It amends the bill, Part 1B, Section 33, Department of Health and Human Services, adds a new proviso, defunding Planned Parenthood.
Senator from Cash, would you recognize, sir?
After the proviso to address the concerns that were raised by the senator from Oconee, the senator from Newberry, and so basically it instructs Director of Health and Human Services to write a federal agency on or about July 1st to get a ruling on whether or not this proviso is in violation of federal law, more or less. That's not the exact words. And says if we receive back official notice that it is, then the proviso will be suspended.
Chairman Oconee, Senator Alexander, what purpose do you rise?
Thank you. See if you can answer a question.
You
know, thank you. Did you know I appreciate you working with us on that. I think this gets the intent. Thank you for helping us find a solution, and at the appropriate time I would like to join you in moving for adoption of the amendment.
Question is, adoption of the amendment. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment's adopted. Clerk will publish the next amendment.
Mr. President,
Sent from Lexington.
I ask unanimous consent to withdraw amendment number 87 that I just carried over.
Is objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Senator from York, Senator Clymer, what purpose do you rise?
In consultation with the senator from Manning, Senator Johnson, I ask unanimous consent to return to the previous amendment and then adopt that amendment.
77?
Yes, it's number 77.
Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Clerk will read.
Amendment number 77, previously carried over by Senator Clymer and others.
Question is, the adoption of the amendment. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment's adopted. Clerk will publish the next amendment.
Next amendment is by Senator Harpootlian.
Senator from Richland.
Number 80 by Senator Harpootlian, previously carried over.
Senator from Williamsburg, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, the senator's out of the chamber. I move to carry over.
Senator from Williamsburg, here he is.
Mr. President, I withdraw my motion to carry.
Thank you, sir. Senator from Richland, we're on your... Carry it over. Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Clerk will publish the next amendment.
Next amendment is amendment number 82A by Senators Jackson and Hembry, previously carried over.
Senator from Richland,
Bill?
Senator Jackson, recognized on the amendment.
This is the amendment that we talked about earlier,
12 right there.
referred to as the vaccination scholarships, with two changes that were made. One recommendation by Senator from Maurice, Senator Hembry, to strike the word "to" as contained in line 4 of the body of the amendment and insert the word "for." This will address concerns about scholarship going directly to the students, and I think the Senator from Maurice is going to talk about that. The other is the Senator from Pickens, Senator Rice. We are deleting the phrase "in this current fiscal year" in line 5, and this would take care of the concerns about being advantageous to wait until after July that the Senator from Pickens raised, which was a great point on that.
Senator from Maurice, Senator Hembry, what purpose do you rise?
Whenever the senator from Richland has concluded his remarks, I would speak on the amendment.
Okay. Thank you. Senator from Maurice, recognized on the amendment. Senator Hembry.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I just wanted to talk a little bit about this amendment. It is a different take on something that was intriguing to me about the vaccination, incentivizing the vaccination program. It was that proposal was intriguing, but it just paying people a gift card or cash money to come down and do what they really ought to be doing anyway just sort of crawls all over you. However, the way Senator Jackson's amendment is a great bit different to me than that previous proposal. And I just want to walk through it real carefully with you. It would provide a $250 scholarship. Okay, this is a scholarship that would go directly to the institutions of higher education. The money would be paid out of coronavirus money. So these are restricted funds. These aren't general funds. These are restricted funds. They have to be used for fighting the coronavirus pandemic. So it is in my view, it is incentivizing it's a way to avoid the pandemic. It's ahead of the pandemic. Instead of reacting to someone being sick and spending a lot of money or building, plastic boxes around students in schoolrooms, this is actually a preventive step that we can use federal money that was provided for the pandemic to do prevention of the spread of the pandemic, at the same time helping out South Carolina students and families that are in higher education. It would apply to any child in higher education, any student in higher education, whether it be technical college, 2-year or 4-year university. So it gives the families and the students a break. It gets us to herd immunity quicker, and we're doing it with somebody else's money that has a specific purpose, and we're meeting that purpose. So to me, it's got a nice, elegant sort of flow to it that really was attractive to me. So that's why I've joined in with this amendment. I hope you'll consider it.
Florence, St. Leatherman, what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Senator Yule, for a question.
I'll be happy to, yes.
So looking at your amendment, seems to me like this is a wonderful amendment. You know why I say that? The reason I say that, we're going to help educate somebody, right?
Right.
That's good for them, good for the state. Is that correct?
It's good for the state. It's good for the institutions of higher education because it provides an additional funding stream to them that they, that otherwise would not have been there. That, I think it's a much better way to spend the money than, like I say, building plastic boxes around 6-year-olds.
Right. So, based on those last comments, aren't we supposed to be here to improve the lives of citizens of this state?
Absolutely.
Doesn't this do it?
Our fundamental responsibility, absolutely.
Absolutely. So, Senator, if you'll permit me, and I'll ask you, I'd like to join you on the adoption.
Thank you very much.
Senator from Newberry, what purpose do you rise?
See if Senator Yule for a question. Senator, how about those students that have already received the vaccination? They don't get.
They would be eligible for this.
They would be eligible.
The way that we've rewritten it, any student that's in higher in the higher education system currently who goes and gets the vaccination, whether it doesn't matter the age. They could be an older student, someone that's going back to school for training, some sort of technical training or anything. They would be eligible for the vaccination. Or if they'd already had the vaccination, they can take their record down to the financial aid office at their institution of higher education and get that money applied to their. Now they don't get the money. It gets applied to their fees at the school.
Senator, did you know that I'm sort of against providing an incentive to people when they're getting the shots free? They were paid for by the federal government. They're getting them free. However, I will say, in this particular instance, the way the senator from Richland drew up his amendment, I would say that we have already asked, or at least made the statement, that our colleges or institutions of higher learning would not issue a mandate that the students had to be vaccinated before they go back to school. So would you not agree that this does provide some, I hate to use incentive, but it does provide an incentive to get those students vaccinated because they're going to be in close proximity with one another?
Well, and a couple things. It's encouragement. I like to think of it as encouragement. If they're slacking or just not getting around to doing it, sometimes particularly young college age. I've had 3 of them come through my house, and I was one myself a long time ago. Sometimes we're not the most responsible at that age, and we know we need to do these things, but we just don't. But with this encouragement, hopefully it will bring more to come in and get the work done. And you're not creating this dual system where there are winners and losers. Like, you're not penalizing the people that already have done the right thing. They're eligible too. And I think, to me, that was real important because...
Senator, I think that's only fair. And did you know that in some cases, some folks, I've already been told, are going to have to go back and get basically what they call a booster shot on the Pfizer vaccine. And I don't know where the J&J is going to fall yet, or the Moderna, but let's say 6 months or a year from now, if there were money left over, would you be, and I don't know how we do it, but would you be amenable to those that have to go back to get the booster shot or second vaccination, that they would be eligible for that also?
I don't think, they're getting the vaccination, so it doesn't restrict them to one time, theoretically they could go twice, but it just has to be within the year that the proviso covers. So absolutely that would cover a booster shot too, in my reading of it.
Senator from Anderson, Senator Cash, what purpose do you rise?
See if the senator would yield for a few questions.
I'll be glad to.
Senator, just in looking at the language of the bill, it says, from the funds appropriated in this act and previously appropriated in the Department of Health and Environmental Control, DHEC shall transfer $50 million from COVID-19 related appropriations.
Right.
So it appears to me like I don't know that we're appropriating funds in the budget for COVID-19. Maybe we are. It's 500 pages. I haven't read every line of it, but this starts out saying from the funds in this act. So I guess my question is, Senator, I don't know if we've still got COVID-19 related money sitting in the bank somewhere that we haven't been able to spend, but if we do, have we got $50 million of that, or is it going to be a figure less than that, whereby the balance is going to have to come out of this budget somewhere?
And I don't want to get out over my skis too much on this. I believe that amount of money is still in DHEC's, essentially on their books and their bank account. I'm getting absolutely, that's correct. That money is money that we have already appropriated, COVID money that they are sitting on at this time to be used for COVID-related expenses.
Senator, it's my understanding, and I'm happy for someone to inform me differently, that a student at Clemson and a faculty member and staff, they're all being required to be tested weekly for COVID-19. Did you know that?
I'm not aware of that, but they might be, I just don't know.
And as far as I know, and I could be wrong, I'm certainly open to being informed, they have to be tested every week, whether they've had COVID or not, and whether they've been vaccinated or not. And I could be wrong, but from your previous comments, you know, it's my understanding, I've read in the newspaper, and of course that makes it so, that the vaccination might only last so long, or another strain might come along and we're going to have some more shots for that strain, or maybe this vaccination is good for 6 months and then they're going to say we got to go get another one. Is it a concern of yours that we are setting some kind of spending precedent here relating to incentivizing these shots that's going to go eventually way beyond $50 million if that continues to be the policy? I'm just asking.
Well, I'm not concerned about that. The federal government has sent us a stunning amount of money back to the states and local governments because of coronavirus, and that's another discussion for, you can get a whole different discussion about that. And honest to goodness, I kind of wonder where we're going to spend it all. I mean, especially the money the early money that was really more directly related to battling the coronavirus pandemic. Some of the money that's coming later is more flexible, but the money at the beginning, and this is some of that money, it's got a purpose that you can't repurpose the money. So to me, this was a way to use that money in a way that meets that purpose and it doesn't break the federal law, but at the same time works to provide some prevention, get us closer to herd immunity faster, and help out families with their college expenses. So to me, it just seemed like I think it can be a one-time thing. Yeah, we did it kind of I think about the one-time checks that Governor McMaster, when we had the tax refund a few years ago, and it was this one-time thing, everybody got, I think it was $50, and I'm not, whether you like that idea or not, and that particular device and doing a tax cut, it was a one-shot deal, and I think we all knew it was sort of a one-shot deal. So hopefully this will be too.
Mr. President, I have a parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry, sir.
Is this bill open to being amended? Is it open to an amendment related to the bill, the proviso?
No.
No. So in other words, I cannot offer the suggestion that a student or faculty member or staff who's been vaccinated should not have to take a weekly test to see if they've got COVID.
Amendments have been cut off. The amendments have been cut off, Senator, from Anderson.
Or even by unanimous consent, you cannot.
Well, the Senate can do almost anything by unanimous consent.
I've heard. Did you know I've heard that?
You want to test it?
I want to raise a point of order, Mr. President.
What's your point?
That we're appropriating funds from a previous year in a budget document that deals with the coming year. And so it's out of order to be trying to appropriate funds that have been received in a previous year.
Anyone else like to speak to the point? Senator from Spartanburg, Senator Martin, or Percy Ride?
I would, but it's just not worth it.
Thank you. Senator from Richland, Senator Jackson.
Mr. President, I'd like to speak to the point. Just so you know, the monies we are talking about was not from a previous budget year. These were special funds that were appropriated by this body from the COVID money that we had.
Senator from Kershaw, Senator Gustafson, what purpose do you rise?
Will the senator yield for a question or two?
You have to yield.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a lot of issues with this particular amendment. My first question is, why is it only limited to schools of higher education that are public in South Carolina? Are we not going to offer this to students who go to non-public educational institutions?
It could have been written that way. I didn't, Senator Jackson, I did not write it that way, but I can tell you philosophically that it provides me no heartburn, but I don't know that I can.
Well, did you know that I have 3 children who are under the age of 23 and over the age of 20? 2 of them were in school. $250 doesn't go far when you're looking at any kind of college, whether it's public or private. So I also would like to ask you, do you really think this is somebody else's money that's been given to our state? It's not just other money. It's federal money, correct?
Right.
But it's our money.
Yeah, right. No, Senator, that's sort of a different discussion.
It is.
And I'm happy to engage in it, and I have some strong feelings about the wisdom by both the Trump and the Biden administration's, amazing amount of funding that they've sent back and that they don't have. They're just printing money and sending it back, and we could have that conversation. But at the same time, now here we are, and it's going to get spent, or it's going to get sent back to the federal government. It's going to get spent in Oregon, or some other place, or California. And I guess, given this Hobson's choice of sorts, I would rather spend it, if it's going to be spent, I'd rather see it spent on citizens in South Carolina than spent on citizens in, Massachusetts. So
Senator, I agree with you.
I
agree with you on that.
Broader concerns with you.
But are you not aware that there are still concerns of people in rural areas who have not gotten their COVID shot? And I've been requesting mobile units to some of these areas for months. They're very, very limited. They're very costly. And I will tell you that $50 million would cover it. And we get everybody to get their shots and not pay them to get the shot. No further questions.
Senator from Anderson, I'm ready to rule on your point. I'll overrule your point. Senator from Anderson. Senator from Charleston, Senator Campson, what purpose do you rise?
I'll yield.
Senator, do you know if the pot of money that the previous proviso offered by the senator from Orangeburg and Richland was drawing from the same pot of federal COVID relief money?
Yes, it was.
And so that's not a distinction, that's not a distinguishing characteristic of yours?
No, we did. I put some additional language in there to try to clarify that money was coming from the coronavirus fund, because I thought when that debate was going on about the other, there was some confusion in the body about, I thought, where the money was coming from, so I wanted to make it clear.
I wasn't sure where it was coming from.
Yeah, I wasn't either, and I kind of went and found out and realized this was money that had already been appropriated to, pay for something in the list. This expenditure would fit the restrictions on that money.
Do you know how the amount of the undesignated funds we have?
The total amount, I don't. I just checked the source. I didn't check the total.
Thank you.
Question is.
Move for adoption.
Adoption amendment, roll call has been requested.
Mr. President, I need to ask.
Sent from Richland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just before the roll call, Mr. President, the changes that I suggested earlier, I need to just ask unanimous consent to make those two changes to the amendment that's on the desk.
The amendment, we have a roll call on now.
The changes that were recommended by Senator from Pickens, Senator Rice, and changed by Senator Hembry. I think I spoke from the well earlier, or is that a part of it? Clerk, I'm not sure if that's a part of it. Yeah, I gave it earlier. I gave the explanation on that. Do I need to? It's not. Mel, doesn't? Not necessarily. Hold on.
Stand at ease.
I mean, I can read it again. Change the word to the for and just.
Senator Richland, you want to explain to the body exactly what you're doing? Senator from Richland, Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Earlier, when I first got up, I mentioned that there were two technical changes. One was made by the Senator from Pickens, Senator Rice, that took out the current fiscal year so that it would apply to students that had already been vaccinated. That was one. It deletes the phrase "in this current fiscal year" as contained in line 5 of the amendment. Then the other change was Senator from Horry, Senator Hembry. In order to do what he just spoke of, it struck the word "to" and inserted the word "for." This will address the concerns about scholarships going directly to students.
Is objection to amending the amendment? Hearing none. Senator from Kershaw, Senator Gustafson.
May I address the senator with a question?
Yes.
Yes.
Was it considered a student like my stepdaughter who graduates on May 11th, who's had her shot, who has no student debt? What happens with a student like that? How are they, if it's retroactive, but she can't get a scholarship because she's graduating and she doesn't have any student debt? How are those people going to be included on this amendment when she's a young person and she's, done what she's supposed to do?
Senator, I wish I can take it back 10 years, then you can get my son who graduated.
Exactly.
And he's had his shots also. This for students that are there. I guess what we're trying to do is to make it as safe as possible. We heard all the concerns about mandates. Senator from Greenville, Senator Corbin raised that in our subcommittee. No mandates. These are just incentives to get current students vaccinated.
Well, my Maggie will be left out.
And I agree with you. I wish we could have included all schools, but
this is Lander University. It's a state-supported school.
Right. Thanks.
Senator from Spartanburg, Senator Martin, what purpose do you ride?
See if the senator from Richland would yield for a question.
He will.
Yes.
Senator, did you know what those students who are fixing to graduate with no student debt are going to receive here shortly?
What? Say that again, Senator.
Do you know what those students that are going to be graduating with no student debt are going to be receiving here shortly?
No, what?
A diploma.
Absolutely.
Is there objection to amending the amendment? Hearing none, so ordered. Now roll call has been ordered. Clerk will ring the bell. Reading clerk will call a roll.
Mr. Adams? No. Mr. Alexander? No. Mr. Allen? Aye. Mr. Bennett? No. Mr. Campson? No. Mr. Cash? No. Mr. Clymer? No. Mr. Corbin? No. Mr. Cromer? Not voting, Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis not voting, Mr. Fanning? Aye. Mr. Gambrell? No. Mr. Garrett? No. Mr. Goldfinch? No. Mr. Grooms? No. Mrs. Gustafson? No. Mr. Harpootlian? Aye. Mr. Hembry? Aye. Mr. Hutto? Aye. Mr. Jackson? Aye. Mr. Kevin Johnson? Aye. Mr. Michael Johnson? No. Mr. Kimbrell? Has leave. Mr. Kempson? Aye. Mr. Leatherman? Aye. Mr. Loftus? No. Mr. Malloy? Aye. Mr. Martin? Not voting, Mr. Massey? No. Mrs. Matthews? Aye. Mr. McElveen? Aye. Ms. McLeod? Aye. Mr. Peeler?
No.
No. Mr. Rankin? Not voting, Mr. Rice? No. Mr. Sabb? Aye. Mr. Scott? Aye. Mrs. Sin? No. Mr. Setzler? Aye. Mrs. Shealy? No. Mr. Stevens? Aye. Mr. Talley? No. Mr. Turner? No. Mr. Verdon? No. Mr. Williams? Aye. Mr. Young? No.
All senators voted. Senator from Spartanburg, Senator Martin, no. Martin votes no. Davis votes no. Cromer votes no. All senators voted. Polls are closed. Clerk will tabulate. Whoop, one more. Senator Rankin votes no. Last call. Have all senators voted? Polls are closed. Clerk will tabulate. By a vote of 18 to 27, the amendment fails. Senator from York, what purpose do you rise?
To raise a point of order under Rule 26F, line 34 on page 280, line 29 on page, excuse me, wait a minute. No, excuse me, it was line 34 on page 146. Line 29 on page 148, and line 5 on page 177. For the benefit of the body as an explanation.
Yeah, please.
Those are line items in the budgets which have been used previously to dispense with secret earmarks, and therefore I believe they're in violation of our secret earmark rule.
Anyone want to speak to the point? Senator from Colleton, Senator Matthews, what purpose do you rise?
I was trying just to ask a question, ask that the senator please repeat those references so that we can check them out after checking Rule 26.
Senator from York, would you comply with the senator from Colleton?
I'd be happy to. That is line 34 on page 146. Destination-specific advertising. Page 148, line 29, sports marketing grant program. And line 5 on page 177, local law enforcement grants, all of which have been used in recent years to dispense with secret earmarks, and that information has been publicly reported numerous times.
Anyone else want to speak to the point? Senator from Maury, Senator Embry.
Well, let's just
Speaking of the point, or?
speak to the point, Mr. President. There may have been past years where there have been secret earmarks that weren't in violation of the rules, as much as we may have liked them or not liked them, and we've now changed that rule to have transparency. It feels like this allegation is something that happened in the past. I'm waiting to hear where the evidence is that there's a secret earmark currently in the budget. It may be. Maybe I wasn't listening close enough. But is there some allegation that there's a violation of the current rule?
I'll help you. I'll overrule your point, Senator from York. Next amendment. I tell you, while I'm ruling on 38.29 that Senator from Orangeburg, Senator Tuttle raised, I sustain the point on 38.29. Clerk will read.
Next amendment is by Senator Cash. Amendment number 20, previously carried
Senator
over.
from Anderson, Senator Cash.
Page 545, Proviso 118.18, strikes line 18 through 20 and inserts.
Unanimous consent request.
State your request, sir.
Unanimous consent to withdraw amendments number 20 through 32.
Any objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Clerk will read the next amendment.
Amendment by Senator Malloy, amendment number 88, previously carried over, amends the bill, Part 1B.
Senator from Darlington moves to carry over his amendment. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is carried over. Clerk will publish the next amendment.
Next amendment by Senators Jackson and Kempson, amendment number 86. It's been previously carried over, amends the bill. Page 554, Proviso 118.18, line 14, inserts.
Senator from Darlington.
There's another amendment that comes after that when I move to carry that amendment over as well until the officer comes back.
Those in favor of carrying over the amendment say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is carried over. Clerk will publish the next amendment.
Jackson's 86, so this would be 86A.
Clerk will read the next amendment.
The next amendment is amendment number 80 by Senator Harpootly, and it's been previously
Senator
carried
from
over.
Richland. Say it again, sir.
Please.
Objection to carrying over the amendment? Hearing none, so ordered. Clerk will publish the next amendment.
Amendment number 88 by Senator Malloy, previously carried over.
Senator from Darlington moves to carry over the amendment. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is carried over.
Next amendment by Senators Jackson and Kempson, amendment number 86, previously carried over.
From Richland, Senator Jackson recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, this is the amendment that deals with the Emmanuel Foundation that we've been talking about and working on for the last 2 days. And in consultation with the Chairman of Finance and staff, basically what this amendment does is that this amendment says that the monies cannot be spent until the other monies have been raised for the project. And if the monies are not raised, and if the project is not constructed, then the money is to be returned back to the general fund.
Question is,
Yes, Mr. President.
Senator from Richland, Senator Jackson.
I would like to ask unanimous consent to substitute what I've just stated, this amendment, for the one that's on the desk.
Senator from Florence, Senator Leatherman. What purpose do you rise?
Senator Hill, for a question.
Yes,
Senator. Isn't this very similar to what we did on the African American Monument?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it is. The monies will be used once the other monies have been raised on that. Yeah.
And what we did on that, and I assume what we're doing here, means that they got to raise money, and I'm not talking about commitments.
Right.
Money on the table.
Yes, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I was told that Charlie Way is the chairman of the foundation, and that John Darby is on chairman of the foundation. Charlie Way is a part of that committee. Other prominent business people are part of that we are very familiar with.
I understand that, and I appreciate that, but isn't the purpose of this amendment to make sure that state money is not spent before the money they raise?
Yes, that is the purpose, is that the state money will be spent after the other monies have been raised.
Senator from Newberry, Senator Cromer, what purpose do you rise?
Senator from Richmond would yield for a question.
He does.
Senator, I think all of us, most of us in the assembly here today, were kind of waiting for y'all to work things out amongst you, the concerns that were there. Let me ask you, and you mentioned that it would not be expended until after the other funds are raised. I don't know what the total, how much is the total, Senator, for the project? Do you have any idea?
Senator from Charleston, who sponsored the proviso earlier, who asked for it to be in the budget, can probably address that.
Senator from Charleston, Senator Kempson, what purpose do you rise?
To respond to the senator's question. Will you ask me your question?
Yes, sir. Senator from Charleston, what would be the total cost of the monument itself, or whatever that's being created?
The projected total cost right now is $17.5 million. Of the $17.5 million, almost $9 million has been raised.
Okay. And my question, Senator from Richland, is if we're going to fund that $2 million after the other 15, I think $15.5 million would be raised, would it be prudent to just leave it in the general fund, and then the general fund would disperse it at the time of construction or whatever? Would that be prudent, or should it be?
Now, Senator, we've carefully gone over this for 2 days and kind of reached a consensus.
So you've already worked that. That's all I need to know.
Yes, I think this is the best method in talking with the chairman of finance. It may take us 2 more days to look at another proposal, so I don't want to do that.
Is there an objection to substituting the amendment? Hearing none, so ordered. Question now is adoption of the amendment as amended. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Amendment's adopted. Clerk will publish the next amendment.
Amendment number 88 by Senator Beloy, previously carried over.
Senator from Darlington. Is objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Clerk will read.
The last amendment is amendment number 80 by Senator Harpootley and previously carried over.
I'm reluctantly recognizing the senator from Richland, Senator Harpootley.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We have a copy of it.
Senator Harpootley.
Hello? On? Okay. Apparently this is the last amendment. That's the good news. The bad news is it's mine. I was somewhat taken aback, frustrated, angered, all kinds of words you could use by what happened yesterday. And I I remembered, I thought I had PTSD, thinking that last year's budget was just as traumatic, and then Senator Leatherman reminded me we didn't have a budget last year, which I'm not sure that forgetting we didn't have one is worse than forgetting if we did have one. So this is my second budget. What I saw yesterday brought me to offer this amendment. I'm going to be very brief, but I think some observations need to be made, and that's why I wanted this the last one. This bill, this amendment, would name the Dodo Bird, which is a bird that's extinct, didn't fly, was renowned for it being clumsy, had a bald head, a green beak, about 3 feet tall. It's extinct, and it is a flightless bird, and I would have it named the state flightless extinct bird. Now you may laugh, please. But what I witnessed yesterday made me think that maybe we have more in common with the dodo bird than we do with any other creature. I watched, and I timed it, we debated an amendment yesterday for 46 minutes. Everyone was in favor of, and it passed 43 to zip. Why did we do that? Why did we do that? We've also debated in this budget, and there's been, and when I met with Senator Leatherman 2 years ago to discuss the budget process, I thought it was a process whereby we funded things, didn't fund other things. There was a debate about whether this was better than that. But what we did yesterday was a couple of things. One, we provided, and I hope that those of you that are going to use this, an opportunity for you to stand at this podium and discuss big issues, criticize, whine, slam fists, gnash teeth. And I guess we were the extras or background in what will end up being a campaign television ad at some point for Congress or governor or something else, because that's the only explanation for what I saw yesterday from a number of people who I respect. I just don't understand why they couldn't fake that somewhere in a studio, why they had to do it here and waste our time. Please. You know, they have a green screen now. You could actually shoot us and put us behind you. Look, you could put that on a green screen, and you could stand in front of a podium. Not quite with that expression, but you could you could put it on a green screen and not waste our time. And in an effort not to waste a lot of time here today.
What are you doing now, Senator Richland?
Just a little bit of waste here. I just want to point out two things. One, let's look at coming up with a way to try to trim the extraneous, and no offense, senators who proposed amendments on abortion and on guns and all these other things. We can start pre-filing or filing bills right now to be taken up in committee and dealt with, all those issues. They can go through committee and subcommittee and come to the floor rather than loading up the budget in a very limited time. The second thing I'd say is this, and I say this in all seriousness, everyone in here that I've dealt with in the last 2 days has been courteous. Now, courteous in the sense they've been nice, not so courteous in the use of our time. The final thing I'll say is this, and Senator Leatherman, I want to commend you. You have patience is not my primary character trait. You've shown an amazing amount of patience with me and others, and to get back to, and I think you originally wanted to talk about this bill, the dodo bird, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is inhabited islands in the Indian Ocean. It primarily ate grass. It was, again, a very ugly bird. It had a green beak, bald head. No one really coveted it to eat. It just couldn't make it in the environment. And there were black dodo birds and white dodo birds. And the white dodo birds went extinct first, and then the black dodo birds went extinct second. And you know, without going into details on why that occurred, I get the sense sometimes that, and maybe I'm just hopeless back there, I'm just sitting there going, please, God, please make this stop. Please.
That's what I'm saying.
50 years of that coming over my shoulder. So I guess what I'd say is this, that we have to be a little more focused, I think, on the task at hand. If you've got issues you want to deal with, whether it's abortion, guns, reparations, whatever, can we do it sometime other than these days we're trying to get this budget through? Or we're going to end up like the Dodo Bird, extinct, politically extinct. People aren't going to put up with this. Senator Leatherman?
Senator from Florence, don't encourage him. Senator from Florence.
Senator, you yield for a question.
He does.
Certainly will.
And I agree with you. Did you know I agree with you? And actually, I'll be talking to Senator Massey, Chairman of Rules Committee. I hope others will be talking. Some of the amendments that were offered for the appropriation bill never gone through committee, never been public hearing, never anything. So I did not, of course I know I'm slow, hard to catch up, I did not really understand what the unintended consequences may be. And I think we got to stop that. I'm not sure I'll be talking to Chairman of Rules Committee, and maybe others will do this. I cannot, it's hard for me to sit here. You say I don't lose my patience. I come awfully close. But I cannot, in good faith, sit here, have totally new material put up as an amendment to the budget, and not get up and talk about it.
Yes, sir.
I hope we'll do that. I agree with you. We need to go through the committee process, the public hearing process, and all of that, so that we all know how it may affect the people of this state.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator from Charleston, Senator Campson.
Would the senator yield?
He will.
Sure.
Senator, the Dodo Bird is the purview of the Fish Game Forestry Committee.
I apologize.
So I thought I should ask you, comment and maybe ask you a question. Did you know that the reason the Dodo Bird, a major reason it became extinct, is because it had great difficulty reproducing?
Yes, sir. I actually read that. Yes.
And are you saying that might apply to this body as well?
Except for Senator Clymer, yes.
Well, the Dodo Bird.
I'm sorry, and Senator Cash. I'm sorry, I didn't want to leave you out.
The Dodo Bird laid only one egg, and the impact of early explorers on those islands in the Indian Ocean and just laying one egg, meaning not being very prolific when it comes to reproduction, led to its demise. I just thought you might want to know that. Perhaps you can draw some analogies.
There are laying eggs. This could go on for a while, but I feel a burning sensation in the back of my head, so I think I'll just sit down. Thank you.
There's an objection. Hearing none, so ordered. There are no further amendments. Now we'll move to the section-by-section vote on the budget. Clerk will call the roll. Senator Marsburg, what purpose do you rise?
To ask a question, we've been handed out these sheets where we've been asked to write our votes down. When it gets to us, can we just pass these up, or do we need to actually read these out?
Both. You'll need to read them out and then pass them up.
Pass them up. Oh, because you don't trust what I'm saying, or you don't trust what I'm writing?
I'll give advisory opinions.
Okay.
Clerk will read. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adams.
other than section 33 is a no. I got it already written down. 108 law enforcement.
Yes to all sections 33, no.
Correct. And yes on third reading.
We'll take a roll call on third reading.
Okay.
Agree.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President, I vote aye on all sections of the budget.
Mr. Alexander votes aye on all sections. Mr. Allen.
Pass over at this time. Go to the next one.
If you could use your microphone, please.
Mr. President, I came back in the chamber. I want to pass over and I'll pick up at the
Without
end.
objection.
Mr. Allen not voting. Mr. Bennett.
Yes to all sections.
Mr. Bennett votes yes to all sections. Mr. Campson.
Mr. President, I abstain from section 1, 1A, 33, 34, 43, 52, 57, and 58. And I vote in favor of all other sections.
Mr. Campson abstains from sections 1, 1A, 33, 34, 43, 52, 57, and 58, and yes to all remaining sections.
Correct.
Mr. Cash.
Vote no on sections 33 and 108. Yes on all other sections.
Mr. Cash votes no on section 33, section 108, and yes on all remaining sections. Mr. Clymer.
I abstain on section 51, part 1A. Abstain from section 78 and 79. Vote no on section 33, section 50, section 87, section 108, and yes on the remaining sections.
Mr. Corbin.
Mr. President, no on section 28, no on section 33, no on section 71, no on section 87, yes on everything else.
Mr. President, I vote aye on all sections of the budget.
Mr. President, I abstain from the following sections of the budget. Section 20A, Section 33, Section 34, Section 44, Section 54, Section 72, Section 74, Section 75, Section 81, Section 82, Section 83, Section 84, Section 109, and Section 114, and I vote yes as to all other sections of the budget.
Mr. President, aye on all sections.
Mr. President, yes to all sections.
Mr. President, I abstain sections 34, 38, 58, 61, 66, 67, 72, 73, 74, 75, 78, 81, 82, 83, 84, 102, 109, and 110. Yes on everything else. Except 108.
Senator McCormick, would you clarify you want to vote no for section on 108?
On section 108, no on 108.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to try it a little differently if the desk will allow me. I'm going to provide the desk with my abstentions, and I vote aye on everything else.
Yes to all sections except 33. I vote no. 33, no.
Mrs. Gustafson.
Hello. I need more time, please.
Mrs. Gustafson not voting. Mr. Harpootlian.
For yes on everything except what I've abstained for on here, or do I have to read them out to you?
Mr. Harpootlian votes yes on all sections except the abstentions he hands to the desk. Mr. Hembry.
Mr. President, I vote no on section 102. I abstain from the following sections of the budget. Section 4, sections 57, 58, 59, 60, 66, 67, 74, 110, and vote yes on the following sections of the budget.
Mr. Hutto.
I vote aye on the budget except for the abstentions, and I'm going to hand to the desk.
Mr. Jackson.
Mr. President, I vote aye on all sections of the budget.
Mr. Kevin Johnson.
Mr. President, I abstain on Section 4, Section 109, and Section 114, and I vote aye on the remaining items in the budget.
Mr. Michael Johnson.
I abstain as to Section 14, 19, 45, 46, 47, 74, 75, and vote yes to all other parts of the budget.
Mr. Kimbrell.
I vote no on Section 102, Section 33, and Section 108, and yes on the remaining items of the budget.
Mr. Kempson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I vote yes on all items of the budget, except the items that I will tender to the clerk.
Mr. Leatherman. Here he is.
Aye on all sections.
Mr. Leatherman votes aye on all sections. Mr. Loftus.
Mr. President, I show not voting on Section 24 or abstaining, and also Section 28. I voted no on Section 33 and aye on the others.
Senator Loftus, if you would repeat yours.
I did not vote or show not voting on Section 24 and 28 and voted no on Section 33 and aye on all the other sections.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. President, I vote aye on all sections of the budget except for those of which I abstain, and I will present those to the desk. And I vote on the budget itself.
Thank you, Mr. President. I vote no on Section 4, no on Section 33, no on Section 108, and yes on all remaining sections.
No to all. No to all sections.
I vote yes on the budget with the
Senator, if you would use your microphone, please.
Sorry. I vote yes on the budget, and the abstentions that I have will be passed up to the desk.
Mr. McElveen.
Mr. President, vote yes on all sections of the budget except for several abstentions, which I'll pass up to the desk.
Mr. McLeod.
I vote yes on all sections of the budget.
Mr. Peeler.
Yes on all sections.
Mr. Rankin.
Yes on all sections except those which I abstained from, which I will hand up.
Mr. Rice.
Vote no on Section 33 and 108, and yes on all of the sections.
Mr. Sabb.
Thank you, Mr. President. I vote yes on all sections of the budget except those that I've written in an abstention, and I will pass those to the desk.
Mr. Scott.
Mr. President, I vote yes on all sections of the budget.
Mrs. Sin.
Yes to all sections except for those I'll hand up to the desk, on which I abstain.
Mr. Setzler.
Mr. President, I vote yes on all sections except the abstention list that I have provided to the clerk.
Mrs. Shealy.
Mr. President, I vote yes on all sections of the budget.
Mr. Stevens.
Mr. President, I vote aye on all sections of the budget.
Mr. Talley.
Mr. President, I vote aye on all sections but for Section 33 and Section 82, and I've presented my abstention list to the desk.
Mr. Turner.
Aye on all sections of the budget.
Mr. Verdon.
No on 33, 102, and 108, sections 33, 102, 108, yes on everything else.
Mr. Williams.
Mr. President, I vote aye on all sections of the budget.
Mr. Young.
Mr. President, I vote aye on all sections with the exceptions of the ones that I abstain, and I'll hand the list to the desk.
Catch those that are not voting. Mr. Allen and Ms. Gustafson.
Senator Allen, are you ready?
Mr. Allen.
And I vote aye on all sections of the budget with the exception of the list that I provided of abstentions to the desk.
Ms. Gustafson, is she?
Mrs. Gustafson.
Thank you. I'm abstaining on Section 33. I vote no on Sections 34, 35, 65, and 102. All others are yes.
That completes the roll call on the sections. Now we'll go to the third reading, House Bill 4100 as amended. Roll call is required. Clerk will ring the bell. Reading clerk will call a roll.
Mr. Adams. Aye. Mr. Alexander. Aye. Mr. Allen. Aye. Mr. Bennett. Aye. Mr. Campson. Aye. Mr. Cash. No. Mr. Clymer. Aye. Mr. Corbin. Aye. Mr. Cromer. Aye. Mr. Davis. Aye. Mr. Fanning. Aye. Mr. Gambrell. Aye. Mr. Garrett. Aye. Mr. Goldfinch. Aye. Mr. Grooms. Mr. Grooms not voting. Mrs. Gustafson. Aye. Mr. Harpootlian. Aye. Mr. Hembry. Aye. Mr. Hutto. Aye. Mr. Jackson. Aye. Mr. Kevin Johnson. Aye. Mr. Michael Johnson. Aye. Mr. Kimbrell. Aye. Mr. Kempson. Aye. Mr. Leatherman. Aye. Mr. Loftus. Aye. Mr. Malloy. Aye. Mr. Martin. Aye. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey votes no. Mrs. Matthews. Aye. Mr. McElveen. Aye. Mr. McLeod. Aye. Mr. Peeler.
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Rankin. Aye. Mr. Rice. No. Mr. Sabb. Aye. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott not. Mr. Scott votes aye. Mrs. Sin. Aye. Mr. Setzler. Aye. Mrs. Shealy. Aye. Mr. Stevens. Aye. Mr. Talley. Aye. Mr. Turner. Aye. Mr. Verdon. Aye. Mr. Williams. Aye. Mr. Young. Aye.
If all senators voted, Senator Grooms vote aye. If all senators voted, polls will close. Clerk will tabulate. By a vote of 43 to 3, House Bill 4100 receives third reading. Now that brings us to Capital Reserve Fund, House Bill 4101. Clerk will read.
It's a joint resolution to appropriate monies from the Capital Reserve Fund fiscal year 2020-2021.
Senator from Greenville, Senator Turner, what purpose do you rise?
To explain the Capital Reserve Fund.
You recognize, sir.
The Finance Committee recommends adopting the Capital Reserve Fund as passed by the House. As previously explained, this will provide $171 million one-time dollars for critical deferred maintenance and capital projects throughout the higher ed system. The only item outside of the higher ed funded through the Capital Reserve Fund is an HVAC replacement at the Commission for the Blind. If there are no questions, I move that the Senate adopt 4101 as passed by the House.
Question is, adoption of the resolution. Roll call is required. Clerk will ring the bell. Reading clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adams. Aye. Mr. Alexander. Aye. Mr. Allen. Aye. Mr. Bennett. Aye. Mr. Campson. Aye. Mr. Cash. Aye. Mr. Clymer. Aye. Mr. Corbin. Aye. Mr. Cromer. Aye. Mr. Davis. Aye. Mr. Fanning. Aye. Mr. Gambrell. Aye. Mr. Garrett. Aye. Mr. Goldfinch. Aye. Mr. Grooms. Aye. Mrs. Gustafson. Aye. Mr. Harpootlian. Aye. Mr. Hembry. Aye. Mr. Hutto. Aye. Mr. Jackson. Aye. Mr. Kevin Johnson. Aye. Mr. Michael Johnson. Aye. Mr. Kimbrell. Aye. Mr. Kempson. Aye. Mr. Leatherman. Aye. Mr. Loftus. Aye. Mr. Malloy. Aye. Mr. Martin. Aye. Mr. Massey. Aye. Mrs. Matthews. Aye. Mr. McElveen. Aye. Mr. McLeod. Mr. McLeod votes aye. Mr. Peeler.
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Rankin. Mr. Rankin votes aye. Mr. Rice. Aye. Mr. Sabb. Aye. Mr. Scott votes aye. Mrs. Sin. Aye. Mr. Setzler. Aye. Mrs. Shealy. Aye. Mr. Stevens. Aye. Mr. Talley. Aye. Mr. Turner. Aye. Mr. Verdon. Aye. Mr. Williams. Aye. Mr. Young. Aye.
If all senators voted? If all senators voted, polls are closed. Clerk will tabulate. By a vote of 46 to 0, House Bill 4101 receives second reading. Senator from Greenville, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, unanimous consent to give H 4101 third reading tomorrow.
There's an objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Given third reading tomorrow. Senator from Florence, Senator Leatherman, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, thank you. Does that do us on the appropriation bill?
Yes, sir.
Mr. President, all committees have wonderful staff. But I want to tell this body, get me some order, please, sir. Get me some order.
Good, get some order. Senator from Richland, if you would, take your seat. Your seat. I might separate you two and get you some new hearing aids. Senator from Florence.
Mr. President, again, thank you. All of our committees have wonderful staff. But I want the members of the Senate to know that staff of Finance Committee is the finest staff ever been assembled. They work Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, weekends, and as much time as they need. When I look at this budget today, helped us craft, I've never seen a budget that meets the needs of the state any more than this does. Senator, I would ask to stand and give them a round of applause, if you would.
Senator from Oconee. Senator Alexander.
Mr. President, I also, following up on that, certainly the Chairman of the Finance Committee, we appreciate your leadership and your commitment to getting us with the third reading of the budget, and I'd like for us to recognize and acknowledge you for the hard work and the dedication that you continue to do.
Senator from Edgefield. That brings us to the statewide third reading, bottom of page 8, House Bill 3539. Clerk will read.
This is a bill so as to prohibit the transportation of live swine on a public road or waterway without an official form.
Senator from Lawrence, Senator Burton, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, I was the only member of the Senate that voted no on second reading, but it was not for lack of appreciation from the chairman and the many members of the committee. I would say this: I hope that all of the advocates for the bill that are in the lobby would appreciate and respect the work that was done here in the Senate, so that when this bill gets to the House, it will be likewise appreciated there for the work that the Senate has done. And I would hope that everyone would encourage our colleagues from the other side of the building to take note of that and concur with the Senate amendment.
Question is, third reading of the bill. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is given third reading. Brings second reading bills now. Senator from Edgefield.
Mr. President, before we go to the second reading calendar, I ask unanimous consent to return to the box and read what's in the box.
Is there an objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Clerk will read.
Introduction of House Bill 3623. This is a bill amending the code relating to early release of an inmate to reduce the percentage of time an inmate who has committed a non-parole offense must serve before he may become eligible for early release.
Corrections and penology.
Introduction of House Bill 3933. This bill amends the code relating to the definition of injury and personal injury in workers' compensation so as to exempt injuries sustained by law enforcement in the line of duty.
Judiciary Committee.
Introduction of concurrent resolution by Senator Jackson to request the Department of Transportation name an intersection at Two Knots Road in Richland County, the Bishop C.L. Lorick Senior Memorial Highway, and erect appropriate signs and markers.
Transportation Committee.
Introduction of House Bill 3730. This bill amends the code relating to a driver of a motor vehicle obeying a signal that indicates an approaching train so as to provide additional circumstances that require a driver to stop a vehicle approaching a railroad grade crossing.
Transportation Committee.
House Bill 3219, bill adds a section to the code to require Department of Social Services to establish a program to pay for certain expenses incidental to becoming legally authorized to drive for children 15 years of age or older who reside in out-of-home care, with exceptions, and amending further sections relating to input liability of a person signing a driver's license application.
Family and Veteran Services Committee.
Introduction of H 4149. This bill adds a section to code so as to provide definitions to the code, adds a section to prohibit a public utility from taking adverse employment action against an employee who made a report of wrongdoing.
Judiciary Committee.
Introduction of H 3943. This is a bill adds a section to code to provide that a pickup truck with a fifth wheel assembly may not tow more than one separate trailing vehicle.
Transportation Committee.
Medical Affairs Committee reports favorable with amendments. On H 508, bill by Senator Shealy and Hutto, it amends various sections of the code all relating to do not resuscitate orders to allow a parent or legal guardian of a medically eligible child to request and revoke a do not resuscitate order for emergency services for the child. Placed on the calendar, Mr. President.
Placed on the calendar.
Medical Affairs Committee reports favorable with amendments on S 264, bill by Senator Matthews. Amends the code so as to provide for the establishment of the Disabled Self-Employment Development Trust Fund to provide assistance to individuals with disabilities to pursue entrepreneurships and self-employment opportunities.
Placed on the calendar.
Medical Affairs Committee reports favorable on H 3222. This is a bill amending the code relating to, in part, penalties for violating waste tire regulations so as to change certain penalty requirements. Placed on the calendar, Mr. President.
Placed on the calendar.
Medical Affairs Committee has reported favorable statewide appointment, State Board of Nursing, 5th Congressional District. Mr. Samuel H. McNutt, Jr. of Winsboro.
Received his information.
Medical Affairs Committee has reported favorable statewide appointment, Mental Health Commission, 5th Congressional District, Dr. Crystal A. Maxwell of Fort Mill.
Received his information.
Medical Affairs Committee reported favorable statewide appointment, reappointment to Donate Life South Carolina at Large, Mr. John P. Brogan of Bluffton.
Received his information.
Medical Affairs Committee reported favorable statewide appointment, member of Donate Life South Carolina, Mr. Alan Sipe of Murrells Inlet.
Received his information.
Yes, it's clear, Mr. President.
The desk is clear. That'll return us back to second reading bills. On your calendar, page 15, House Bill 3056. Clerk will read.
This is a bill amending various sections of the code all relating to wildlife refugee boards and repealing sections relating to fish and game commissions.
Sent from Charleston, Senator Campson. What purpose do you rise?
I believe the senator from Darlington wants to look at this bill about local wildlife boards, and so move to carry it over.
Is objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Now, page 16, Senate Bill 736. Clerk will read.
Mr. President.
Senator from Charleston.
I have a unanimous consent request.
State the request, sir.
Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent to recommit the following the following regulations to Fish, Game, and Forestry, and that would be S 736, starting on page 16, and 737, 738, 739, 740, and 742. They've been on the calendar for about a month.
There's an objection. Hearing none, so ordered. All right, now that brings us to the top of page 18, House Bill 3505. Clerk will read.
This is a bill amending the code relating to infrastructure maintenance fee assessed against a vehicle or other items upon its first registration, so as to provide that this fee also applies for first titling.
Berkeley, Senator Grooms, what purpose do you rise?
Explain the bill.
You recognize, sir.
Members of the committee, when we passed the Roads Bill, Act 40 of 2017, we created two situations that did not exist before 2017. what we did is we no longer have a sales tax on a vehicle, we have an infrastructure maintenance fee. But when we passed the bill, we required that the infrastructure maintenance fee be assessed when a vehicle is registered, not when a vehicle is titled. And that's created a couple of problems. One, you have some folks who won't pay one, and then you have some folks, particularly truckers, who will buy a vehicle, then lease it to a trucking company as an owner-operator, who then have to pay it again. And if they change registrations, they'll have to pay it again. So we created a situation where some don't pay and some pay several times. This corrects that issue. It moves that the infrastructure maintenance fee would be due at the time of titling and/or registration.
Question is, second reading of the bill, roll call is required. Clerk will ring the bell. Meeting clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adams. Aye. Mr. Alexander. Aye. Mr. Allen. Aye. Mr. Bennett. Aye. Mr. Campson. Aye. Mr. Cash. Aye. Mr. Clymer. No. Mr. Corbin. Aye. Mr. Cromer. Mr. Cromer not voting. Mr. Davis. Not voting. Mr. Fanning. Aye. Mr. Gambrell. Aye. Mr. Garrett. Aye. Mr. Goldfinch. Aye. Mr. Grooms.
Aye.
Aye. Mrs. Gustafson. Aye. Mr. Harpootlian. Aye. Mr. Hembry. Aye. Mr. Hutto. Aye. Mr. Jackson. Aye. Mr. Kevin Johnson. Aye. Mr. Michael Johnson. Aye. Mr. Kimbrell. Mr. Kimbrell not voting. Mr. Kempson. Aye. Mr. Leatherman. Aye. Mr. Loftus. Mr. Loftus votes aye. Mr. Malloy. Aye. Mr. Martin. Aye. Mr. Massey. Aye. Mrs. Matthews. No. Mr. McElveen. Not voting Mr. McLeod. Not voting Mr. Peeler.
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Rankin. Aye. Mr. Rice. Aye. Mr. Sabb. Aye. Mr. Scott. Aye. Mrs. Sin. Aye. Mr. Setchler. Not voting Mrs. Shealy. Aye. Mr. Stevens. Aye. Mr. Talley. Aye. Mr. Turner. Aye. Mr. Verdon. Aye. Mr. Williams. Aye. Mr. Young. Aye.
If all senators voted, Senator McLeod votes aye. Senator Kimball votes aye. Senator Davis votes aye. Senator McElveen votes aye. If all senators voted, polls are closed. Clerk will tabulate. A vote of 42-2, House Bill 3505 receives second reading. Page 19 now, top of the page, Senate Bill 717. Amendments on the desk. Clerk will publish the First Amendment. Senator from York, Senator Clymer, what purpose do you rise?
Ask unanimous consent to withdraw my amendment.
Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Amendments withdrawn. Further amendments. Clerk will read.
Next amendment on the desk is amendment number 2 by Senator Talley. It adds a new section to read.
Senator Spartanburg, Senator Talley.
Mr. President, unanimous consent request to withdraw that amendment as
Is there
well.
an objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Amendments withdrawn. No further amendments. Now the question is, Senator from Edgefield, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to apply the previous unanimous recorded vote for this second reading vote.
Is there an objection? Hearing none, so ordered. They receive a 46-0 vote for second reading. Next bill, House Bill 3545. Clerk will read.
Bill relating to the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism's authority to construct streets and roads through Hunting
Senator
Island.
from Charleston, Senator Campson. What purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, explain the bill.
You recognize, sir.
What this bill does is remove now obsolete provisions in the code that deal with private leased leased land on Hunting Island State Park. There is no longer any leased property there, and so this is removing obsolete language.
Question is, second reading of the bill. Roll call is required.
I'd ask unanimous consent to apply the last unanimous roll call vote.
Is there an objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Receive a 46-0 vote. Item page 19, House Bill 3884. Clerk will read.
This bill so as to authorize the Department of Natural Resources.
Senator from Charleston,
Transmit
Senator Campson, recognized on the bill.
This bill would permit the recording of electronic liens for the purchase of boats and motors. Right now, that all has to be done the old way by paper.
Question is, second reading of the bill.
President, I'd ask unanimous consent to apply the last unanimous roll call vote.
Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Bill receives second reading by 46-0 vote. Next bill, bottom of page 20, House Bill 3957. Amendments on the desk. Clerk will publish the amendment.
Mr. President,
Senator from Charleston.
I'd like to explain the bill and the amendment.
You're recognized, sir.
Mr. President,
Okay.
this is a bill that deals with changes to the flounder limit, and the original bill reduced the size limit or increased the size limit for flounder to 15 inches. The committee amendment changed that to 16. I'll explain the committee amendment. 15 inches to 16 inches on the size limit. A limit per person reduced from 10 flounder to 5 per person, a total of a reduction from 20 per boat to 10 per boat. Increases the saltwater fishing license by $5 to go to a stocking program for flounder. And we also eliminated a slot limit provision. The House had in its bill a slot limit. You could keep a flounder between 15 inches and 20 inches, and we changed it where you could keep any flounder 16 inches or larger, and we eliminated that slot limit. And this is needed because the flounder fishery is in trouble. It's really, we are not the cause of the problem. It's really North Carolina primarily. They catch almost 60% of the flounder. As a regional fishery, we catch 10%. And we already did a lot a few years ago by increasing our limit and reducing our take, and that helped a lot. So we're not really the problem, so we can't be the final solution, but we're doing our part in passing this bill, and hope our neighboring states do theirs as well.
Senator from Colleton, Senator Matthews, what purpose do you rise?
See if the senator would yield for
I'll
a
yield.
question. Did this bill do, or any of the amendments do anything as it relates to jigging for flounder?
No, it does not. It does not address any method of take. Jigging would be a method of take. We didn't address that.
Okay. Does North Carolina?
You mean gigging?
Yes,
Yes, no,
gigging.
we didn't eliminate gigging.
Isn't that
There is
great?
jigging for fish and there is gigging for fish. They're two different things, but we didn't address either of those. We didn't. You can still gig, you can still jig, you can still.
But
Boogaloo.
after we had this in the committee meeting, there was someone that came up, and the reason why I asked, I don't know the difference in, all I know is it's not with a pole. But the question that was asked was either gigging or jigging, you choose. Once you catch the flounder by either of those methods, you usually have killed it.
Yeah, that's gigging does that.
So if it's the wrong size, then you're going to throw back dead fish?
Yeah. Well, you always have to deal with that when you're gigging a flounder. Now, what we
No,
did.
not me. They.
Your husband gigs flounder, I'll bet you. But what we did, because that is a reality, it's difficult. But when you gig flounder, and I gig flounder, at least you know what the size limit is, and so basically you err on the side of caution, and you make sure you gig just a really big fish. And so with a 16-inch size limit above, I mean, we have a 15-inch size limit now and above, and I don't think I've ever really gigged a flounder too small since we implemented that, because I just gig really big ones. But what the House did was they put a slot limit in where you could only gig a fish that is above 15 inches and below 20. Now, that is hard for a gigger to comply with that, because the gigger decides, I'm going to only, we call them doormats. A big flounder is what you call a doormat. It's the size, because they look like a doormat in front of your house or your door. So we just gig doormat flounder, but it's not precise enough for us to figure out it's between 16 inches and 20 inches like the House version would have required. And so what we did was we eliminated the slot limit. We actually increased the size limit up by an inch to 16 inches, but we eliminated that upper limit, okay? We eliminated that because a gigger could not really comply with that. They would inevitably be breaking the law and you also have this reality that the refraction in the water magnifies the size of a fish by 25%. And it actually changes the angle of, you need to know that when you're actually gigging, it changes your angle. You got to gig low instead of high because the water refracts the light. It refracts the light and it magnifies the fish. So that makes it, if you have a slot limit, which means you can only gig a fish, you can catch and keep a fish between 15 or 16, whichever you choose as a lower limit, and 20 inches, you make it almost impossible for a gigger to comply with the law, to be able to gig and do it.
Why not just get rid of gigging altogether?
Because gigging's it's
fun?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Yeah, it is. Because you're out there in the middle of the night, no one else is out there, it's quiet, it's beautiful.
I thought gigging was done in the nighttime, so how do you see?
Lights, you have lights in the boat shining into water.
In our murky waters, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I renew my God, make it stop. Senator from Pickens, Senator Rice, for what purpose do you rise?
Will Senator yield for a question?
Yes, I'll yield.
Yes or no? Yes or no question?
Question on you've got I think you said 15 or 16 to 20. If a fish is outside that, if you catch a fish outside that limit, are you able to keep that fish?
No, you have to throw it back. But the trouble is, if you gigged one, you killed it.
I'm talking about if you're fishing with a
rod and reel, you throw it back.
So if you catch a 22-inch flounder, you've got to throw it back?
You could keep one, under the House version, you could keep one fish over 20 inches. You'd have to throw all the other ones back.
Anything undersized, you throw back?
Correct. Anything undersized, you throw back. In their version, under 15 inches, you throw back. Over 20 inches, you throw back, except for one. Over 20, you can keep.
So if you catch a big one, you get to keep that one.
But we amended it. We increased the limit, the lower size limit to 16 inches. That's a fish that would have spawned 2 or 3 times perhaps, so they'll produce more new fish. And we eliminated this upper slot limit. Because you can't comply with the limit when you're getting.
We did that in the Senate bill?
Yes, we did that in the amendment in the committee, yes.
And the bill that we're talking about, the House bill, they amended it. What are we trying to do with it now?
We amended the House bill to eliminate the slot limit. The upper limit. That's
so
what we did.
You catch the bigger fish. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Senator from Berkeley, Senator Grooms, for what purpose do you rise?
Like to ask that we carry this bill over.
Oh, come on.
Well, Mr. President, I think we ought to be able to...
I'm getting out of this phone booth up here.
Lake Kiwi, you should be able to keep and catch all the flounder you can catch out of the lake.
There's an objection to carrying over the bill.
You really want to do that?
No, I do need to carry it over.
All in favor of carrying over the bill, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill's carried over. Top of page 21 now. House Bill 3244, amendments on the desk.
Committee amendment, Mr. President.
Committee amendment. Senator from Spartanburg.
Move to carry over.
Senator from Spartanburg
Move to carry over.
Carry over House Bill 3244. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Bill's carried over. Now House Bill 3541. Clerk will read.
It's a bill to provide that the regulation of fires by the state forester does not apply to fires used for the preparation of food or fires used in appropriate enclosures.
Question, Senator from Spartanburg, what purpose do you rise?
Explanation.
Explanation has been requested. Senator from Spartanburg, Senator Talley is recognized for explanation.
Thank
House
you.
Bill 3541.
Mr. President, this bill does two things requested by the Forestry Commission. One is it clarifies that burning exemptions, certain burning laws do not apply to a backyard fire pit or a backyard chimney that someone would construct for an outdoor living area, so it clarifies that definition. The other thing it does is right now, these officers cannot write a warning ticket. They can only issue a citation. So this is adding a warning ticket so that if they come out and somebody is guilty of a first offense, they can issue a warning and not cite them and immediately make them go to magistrate court.
Question is, second reading of the bill. Roll call is required. Senator from Spartanburg, Senator Talley.
I would ask that we apply the last unanimous roll call to this bill.
Is objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Objections heard. Reading clerk will call the roll. No, clerk will ring the bell. Meeting clerk will call the roll. Senator from Berkeley, Senator Grooms.
I'd like to request leave for Senator from Ori, Senator Rankin for the balance of the day.
Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Meeting clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adams? Aye. Mr. Alexander? Aye. Mr. Allen? Aye. Mr. Bennett? Aye. Mr. Campson? Aye. Mr. Cash? Aye. Mr. Clymer? Aye. Mr. Corbin? Aye. Mr. Cromer? Mr. Cromer not voting. Mr. Davis? Aye. Mr. Fanning? Aye. Mr. Gambrell? Aye. Mr. Garrett? Aye. Mr. Goldfinch? Aye. Mr. Grooms? Aye. Mrs. Gustafson? Aye. Mr. Harpootlian? Aye. Mr. Hembry? Aye. Mr. Hutto? Aye. Mr. Jackson? Aye. Mr. Kevin Johnson? Aye. Mr. Michael Johnson? Aye. Mr. Kimbrell? Aye. Mr. Kempson? Aye. Mr. Leatherman? Aye. Mr. Loftus? Aye. Mr. Malloy? Aye. Mr. Martin? Aye. Mr. Massey? Aye. Mrs. Matthews? Aye. Mr. McElveen? Aye. Mr. McLeod? Aye. Mr. Peeler?
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Rankin has leave. Mr. Rice? Aye. Mr. Sabb? Aye. Mr. Scott votes aye. Mrs. Sin? Aye. Mr. Setzler? Not voting. Mrs. Shealy? Aye. Mr. Stevens? Aye. Mr. Talley? Aye. Mr. Turner? Aye. Mr. Verdon? Aye. Mr. Williams? Aye. Mr. Young? Aye.
Have all senators voted? Have all senators voted? Polls will close. Clerk will tabulate. By a vote of 43-0, the bill is given second reading. Bottom of page 21 now, House Bill 4035. Clerk will read.
This is a bill to amend the code relating to South Carolina manufacturers' responsibility and consumer convenience information technology equipment collection.
What purpose do you rise?
I should explain the bill.
You recognize, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. The bill in and of itself is very simple. It basically extends the repeal of a regulation that was first enacted back in 2014 to 2023. Without the bill, that regulation would expire at the end of 2021. The underlying regulation deals with a program through DHEC working with manufacturers, counties, municipalities, those in the waste industry, as well as the conservation community, to look at ways to properly dispose of e-waste, such that old televisions, computer monitors, things of that nature, not going into landfills, and participating in recycling programs through the manufacturers.
Question is, second reading of the bill. Senator from Maysfield, what purpose do you rise?
Is consent to apply the previous unanimous recorded vote?
Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Bill will be given second reading by a 43-0 vote. Page 22 now, House Bill 4098. Clerk will read.
This is a joint resolution approving regulations of the Clemson University State Crop Pest Commission relating to Asian longhorn beetle
Clymer,
quarantine.
what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a regulation dealing with the Asian longhorn beetle, which is a terrifying looking beetle, but also a real pest to our forestry folks. And as is our custom, we'll leave this on the calendar for a few days, allow members to ask questions, and then recommit it at the appropriate time.
Restate your request.
Oh, no, I move to carry it over.
Senator moves to carry over the bill. Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered.
Did you see the picture of that thing? Oh, yeah. You see?
That brings us to the bottom of page 22 now, House Bill 3612. Clerk will read. Senator from Spartanburg.
Point of order.
State your point, sir.
Under Rule 39, the bill has not been on the calendar the required amount of time.
Sustain your point. Middle of 23 now, House Bill 3308.
Mr. President,
Spartanburg.
renew my same point of order.
I sustain your point. Now we'll come to Senate Resolution, Senate 700. Clerk will read.
President.
Senator from Spartanburg.
Explanation, please, on 700. I want to make sure that doesn't include the CCP.
Senate Bill 700. Explanation's been requested. Senator from Oconee.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is just recognizing Taiwan and their trade association and impact that they have on the United States, and especially South Carolina, that they are a great partner for ours. Move for the adoption of the resolution.
All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The resolution's adopted. Brings us to page 24 now, concurrent resolution, Senate 768. Oh, it's contested. Sorry, it's contested. That brings us to the motion period, Senator from Edgefield.
Mr. President, I move to discharge from the Judiciary Committee H3094. That is a bill dealing with the open carry of permitted firearms. We've had 2 subcommittee hearings that have lasted a little over 3 hours to hear testimony on it. I move to discharge it from the Judiciary Committee.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Roll call's been requested. 5 members answer the call. 5 members do. Clerk will ring the bell. Reading clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adams. Aye. Mr. Alexander. Aye. Mr. Allen. No. Mr. Bennett. Aye. Mr. Campson. Aye. Mr. Cash. Aye. Mr. Clymer. Aye. Mr. Corbin. Aye. Mr. Cromer. Not voting, Mr. Davis. Aye. Mr. Fanning. No. Mr. Gambrell. Aye. Mr. Garrett. Aye. Mr. Goldfinch. Aye. Mr. Grooms. Aye. Aye. Mrs. Gustafson. Aye. Mr. Harpootlian. No. Mr. Hembry. Aye. Mr. Hutto. Mr. Hutto not voting. Mr. Jackson. No. Mr. Kevin Johnson. No. Mr. Michael Johnson. Mr. Michael Johnson not voting. Mr. Kimbrell. Aye. Mr. Kempson. Mr. Kempson votes no. Mr. Leatherman. Aye. Mr. Loftus. Aye. Mr. Malloy. Not voting. Mr. Martin. Aye. Mr. Massey. Aye. Aye. Mrs. Matthews. No. Mr. McElveen. Not voting. Ms. McLeod. No. Mr. Peeler.
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Rankin. Mr. Rankin has lead. Mr. Rice. Aye. Mr. Sabb. No. Mr. Scott votes no. Mrs. Sin. Not voting. Mr. Stetzler. Not voting. Mrs. Shealy. Aye. Mr. Stevens. Mr. Stevens votes no. Mr. Talley. Aye. Mr. Turner. Aye. Mr. Verdon. Aye. Mr. Williams. No. Mr. Young. Aye.
All senators voted. Senator Michael Johnson votes aye. Have all senators voted? Polls are closed. Clerk will tabulate. By a vote of 27 to 12, the bill is recalled.
Mr. President.
From Maysfield. Purpose to rise.
Mr. President, I've submitted a Rules Committee poll sheet to the desk. I move to set H3094 for special order in the rules slot.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Senator from Colleton, what purpose do you rise?
Point of order. He is moving to set the bill we just voted on and put it on the desk for special order. That means it has not been on the calendar for 24 hours.
Senator from, anyone want to speak to the point? Senator from Spartanburg, our 24-hour rule
I'd like to speak to the point.
Senator from Spartanburg.
The bill cannot receive second reading prior to sitting on the calendar for 24 hours. So I believe you'd have to
It cannot
overrule her point of order.
My point of order is it has not been on the desk 24 hours and cannot receive any, hadn't been put on the desk yet, so.
Anyone want to speak to the point?
Mr. President, I maintain what I stated earlier. The rule only applies to being printed on the desk for 24 hours prior to second reading.
Senator, overrule your point. All in favor of setting the bill for special order, vote aye.
Aye.
Roll call has been requested. 5 members second the call. I'll give you a roll call. Clerk will ring the bell. Clerk will call the roll.
President.
Senator from Orangeburg.
I move to apply the 27-12 vote that we just had.
Is an objection? Objection's heard. Meeting clerk will call the roll. Meeting clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adams. Aye. Mr. Alexander. Aye. Mr. Allen. No. Mr. Bennett. Aye. Mr. Campson. Aye. Mr. Cash. Aye. Mr. Clymer. Aye. Mr. Corbin. Aye. Mr. Cromer. Not voting, Mr. Davis. Aye. Mr. Fanning. No. Mr. Gambrell. Mr. Gambrell votes aye. Mr. Garrett. Aye. Mr. Goldfinch. Aye. Mr. Grooms. Aye. Mrs. Gustafson. Aye. Mr. Harpootlian. No. Mr. Hembry. Aye. Mr. Hutto. Mr. Hutto not voting. Mr. Jackson. Mr. Jackson not voting. Mr. Kevin Johnson. Not voting. Mr. Michael Johnson. Aye. Mr. Kimbrell. Aye. Mr. Kempson. No. Mr. Leatherman. Aye. Mr. Loftus. Aye. Mr. Malloy. Aye. Mr. Martin. Aye. Mr. Massey. Aye. Mrs. Matthews. No. Mr. McElveen. Not voting. Mr. McLeod. No. Mr. Peeler.
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Rankin has leave. Mr. Rice. Aye. Mr. Sabb. No. Mr. Scott. No. Mrs. Sin. Not voting. Mr. Setzler. Not voting. Mrs. Shealy. Aye. Mr. Stevens. No. Mr. Talley. Aye. Mr. Turner. Aye. Mr. Verdon. Aye. Mr. Williams. No. Mr. Young. Mr. Young votes aye.
All senators voted. Senator Jackson votes no. Senator Kevin Johnson votes no. Have all senators voted? Last call of all senators voted. Polls will close. Clerk will tabulate. By a vote of 28 to 12, the bill is set for special order. Senator from Edgefield.
Period.
Senator from Edgefield moves to dispense with balanced motion period. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Motion period is now closed. Now turn page 5, bill to return from the House, Senate Bill 229. Clerk will read.
It's a bill to enact the South Carolina Child Abuse Response Protocol
Senator from
Act.
Spartanburg, Senator Talley, what purpose do you rise?
To explain the House amendment and ask for concurrence.
You recognize, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, this is a bill we dealt with earlier that deals with the child abuse response protocol used by children's advocacy centers across the state. The House clarified one definition of political subdivision and listed entities that would covered under that definition in the act. It's really no substantive change, and so I would ask for concurrence.
Question is concurrence. Roll call is required. Clerk will ring the bell. Senator from Kershaw, Senator Gustafson, what purpose do you rise?
May I ask for unanimous consent to be added as a co-sponsor to this bill? Can I do that? Is it too late?
Here's one of those unanimous consent. We can do anything situations. There's an objection. Hearing none, so ordered.
Thank you.
Senator from Oconee, what purpose do you rise?
Move unanimous consent for the last unanimous roll call to be applied for concurrence.
There's an objection. Hearing none, so ordered. A vote of 43 to 0, we concur in the House amendments. Senator from Edgefield, Senator Massey, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, I want to see if anybody has any unanimous consent requests. I think we're about through for the week, unless there are any.
Senator from Edgefield.
Mr. President, I move to invite the House to ratify acts at a convenient time.
An objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Senator from Edgefield.
If there are no unanimous consent requests, I move the Senate do now adjourn.
All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Senate stands adjourned until 12 noon Tuesday.